relatively live. All right. So I'm going to jump right in. If you do or don't know what custom meta boxes is, I'm going to tell you anyway. Custom meta boxes is basically how you add additional content areas into any post type that you like. And for the freelancer, agency, and plugin shop, theme shop, they're basically indispensable in WordPress, because generally when you create a post type of any kind, you have the default options that WordPress gives you, which is like a title, which is the content area, which is maybe categories, maybe tags. These are the default types of content that you can enter into any post type. If you want to do something besides that, which generally speaking, if you have a post type that's not a post or a page, like think of maybe, for example, a bio, like a staff bio. You want to have a bunch of pages that are about your staff. What kind of information are you going to have there? Well, you're going to have the first and last name. You're going to have the email address or the phone number. You're going to have all kinds of stuff written about Joseph. I'm just kidding. Hey, welcome. Those things, you might want to present them in a unified format on the front end. Well, the only best way to make sure that they have a unified format in the front end is to give it a unified format in the back end. So that's where custom meta boxes come in, is being able to allow you to say, I don't want this to be just a generic text area. I want to have enter Matt, enter the first name, enter the last name, enter their job description, enter their profile picture, those types of things. And when it comes to any kind of plugin that you know of that adds a new post type to your adds a new custom post type, like for example, the Modern Tribes calendar event, the event calendar. That's a post type that's called events. Well, it's called tribe events technically, and each of those posts have a bazillion different inputs on there, because they have lots of different ways to present your events. There is a content area to describe the event itself. There's then the Google Maps location where you enter the location. That's a custom meta box that they created. There's the event coordinator name. There's how to reach the event coordinator, like an email or phone number or whatnot. All of those are custom meta boxes, and they do that so that when you hit publish, there's a unified look and feel on the front end. So you want that unified form in the back end. This is a great way to serve your clients when they want to have special kinds of post types and whatnot on their website. If they want a staff directory of their business, just saying, oh, just put it into a post. Well, then you'll find out that every single post looks different if you do it that way. So the go-to, I'll start with the go-to. If you're a freelancer agency, the go-to for doing custom post types and typically custom meta boxes are two plugins. For the custom post types, the most common one is called CPT UI, Custom Post Type UI. It's a plugin that basically does exactly that. It gives you a UI in order to create post types. And you just install that on WordPress, just like any other plugin. And then in order to add your custom meta boxes, the one that is most commonly used is called Advanced Custom Fields. Those two plugins just together bring you all kinds of power for building out custom post types with custom meta boxes together. They're a really great powerhouse together. I want to just give you one live example of that that I have locally here. I have locally there's a nonprofit that I work with called San Diego Refugee Tutoring. If you're interested in refugees in any way and helping out in any way, they're a great local group of do-gooders who give tutoring every Tuesday and Thursday night to a school in City Heights called Ibarra. And they have about 60 refugee kids there every Tuesday and Thursday that they are tutoring. Come on, desktop server, you could do it. And I'm helping them out with their website. And one of the things that we need to do is do the RSVPs for their events. So the first thing I did in this case, I just really needed a post type that would allow me to have like the name of the person RSVPing, the date of the RSVP, some really basic stuff. So in this case, I went with those options that I just told you about. Here's custom post type UI right here, where you can add and edit post types. I'll just go there real quickly so you can see my RSVP post type. So right here you see I just chose an RSVP as the slug. Here's the plural. You just set up all of these different fields in order to create your post type. Post type description, all these things. And then once I hit publish, what I had was this guy right here, RSVPs. And you can go over here to all RSVPs, and you'll see the ones that are coming in. Now I set up a Caldera form on the front end that actually populates these. So these are being populated from a form on the front end. They're not actually things I'm not going to go in and hit add new, generally speaking. I needed this post type in order to submit from the front end. So what happens with that Caldera form is it's mapped the fields directly to the fields that I created with advanced custom fields. So after I created this post type, I just took advanced custom fields and then I added these fields into it. Actually, I think this has the ugly layout that I don't like right now. I just changed it on the live site. Yeah, see, I use this weird ACF free plugin called ACF columns or something like that, and it doesn't look so great. But it doesn't really matter because, like I said, I'm not really using this on the back end so much. This is really just for tracking purposes. So I have, these are all advanced custom fields. Event date, event ID, event type. I actually didn't enter it in this case. Volunteer name, volunteer email. Oh, gray that out. Volunteer user ID. These are actually populated because they can only RSVP if they're logged in. So those things are populated automatically on the form, actually. And then the date of the RSVP. And this is actually one thing we do manually, is whether they attended or not. We're going to toggle that. So it's working just fine that way. For me, I just wanted to create this post type in order to have that form populated. I didn't want to spend a whole bunch of time doing that manually with code. So I just installed those plugins, configured the post type, added the custom fields, and then I could do the fancy footwork on the front end from there. For me, it was a quick and dirty, easy way to make it happen. But often, the downside of using these plugins like this is great if you have a client side that you just need to make it happen and you know that it's going to work and you can ship it. It's great for those kinds of things. But if you're actually going to build something that you're going to want to distribute, like a theme or like a plugin, then you can't, or you don't really want to bundle these plugins into your own plugin. There's some fancy ways that you can make it. There's this thing called TGM activation that says, when you activate my plugin is going to tell you, oh, hey, by the way, you have to also install these other plugins in order for my plugin to work. That technically works, but it's not a really fun user experience. So for plugin authors and theme authors, generally speaking, what they do, instead of trying to bundle these other plugins that are really just UIs for code, they have libraries of code. So on my local site here, I actually have, this is one's just a duplicate, but let me actually increase the size a little bit here. I have two different plugins here, Composition CPT with CMB2 and Composition CPT with native meta boxes. These are the two I want to highlight real quick that are different than doing it with advanced custom fields and the CPT UI. So what these two plugins do, they both do the exact same thing. Both of them do the exact same thing. One of them uses native meta boxes. Native meta boxes are basically the logic, the functions that are built into WordPress that WordPress itself uses to create its meta boxes, like the content area, like the categories and the tags and those things. And the Composition CPT with CMB2 is me creating this post type and then also creating the meta boxes with the library called CMB2. So CMB2, like I said, is a plugin that we were just talking about. Actually, no, I was talking about a different one. Sorry, clarify, back up. CMB2 is also a plugin that you can use, just like Advanced Custom Fields is. You can install CMB2 and you can create meta boxes in the same way that you do with advanced custom fields. It's just, generally speaking, I find that advanced custom fields is more common among freelancers and developers. But CMV2 originally was a really great library of code that you can use to create your own meta boxes. So I'm going to start with the native meta boxes because that's basically the best way to understand then what CMV2 does next. So I just activate that, and no fatal errors. So far, so good. And here's my custom post type that I have in there. And then all it is just a custom post type. I don't have tags or categories on it right now. So if I go here, I have one composition set up here. If I go to edit, you'll notice that right away I have a different UI going on here than I did with my RSVP example. Like I said, on the RSVP one, I didn't really care what the backend looked like. I just wanted it to work. But in this case, I do want the backend to look a little bit more put together. So you'll notice right away that I have this section here, which is over the content area. With meta boxes, you can define the position that they exist in within the post edit screen. They can be priority high, which means above the text area, or they could be on the side also, which typically would be below the publish box, but usually over the featured image box. You could do some fancy footwork to make it be exactly the position you want it to be, but generally I find that to be a little bit problematic. And then you can also make the priority low, which would put it down below the content area. There's, if you've ever installed Yoast SEO on your site and you activate it, you'll notice that it generally applies its meta box, that whole UI where with all the different knobs and whatnot that let you to configure your SEO magic for that post. Those are all meta boxes. They just happen to style them really in a dramatic way. You'll notice that when you activate Yoast, the first thing you'll see on all your posts and pages, I think it's still the case, isn't it still the case, that the Yoast SEO box is at the very top, right underneath the title, above the content area. It's up in this area. I believe it's still that way. Anybody? Immediately below? Okay. To the very bottom. Oh, you don't want it right below the content area. Okay. Exactly. Yeah. I think it was probably maybe 3 or 4 years ago that Yoast Metabox would always be right below the title on every single post type. And yeah, and it was super obnoxious. Exactly. There was a couple different ones. There was one that was that Chris Perryman's. It was humble Yoast or something like that. Yoast don't boast. There you go. Yoast don't boast. Exactly. And it basically took the priority off of the Yoast meta box and put it down to the bottom. If you ask Yoast, say it again. That's all it did. That's all it did. Yeah, just Yoast don't boast. But if you ask Yoast about why it was up there, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, like often if you're actually writing for content, you'll want to think about the way you actually word your keywords and key phrases. You want to do that first often. So there's logic behind it for sure. But I think enough people complained about it that he switched it up. So these are. No, I definitely was thinking about the position of the meta box itself, for sure, for sure. And I know that the Yoast don't boast. Yeah, for sure, that also. But I know that the Yoast don't boast was also about pushing the meta box down to the bottom of the post edit screen too. Anyway, all right, so this one, as I mentioned, was done all with native WordPress functions. So we're going to check that out real quick. This is that plugin right here. There we go. Let me enlarge this also, if possible. What's the quick key for zooming in? There we go. Yeah, scroll. All right, so it's just standard header, just standard die if you hit it. And then what I do here is just do a bunch of globals so I can reference this file, not a bunch, just a couple, and load the plugin. Text domain, these are just best practices stuff. Then I'm registering the post type with this file. So I'm going to get that file, it's included here. And then I have another file that's adding the meta fields themselves. And then I have another file that's adding the metadata themselves. And then I'm enqueuing some assets. So my main file is really just defining globals and the text domain, and then it's loading up the necessary files for the post type to be registered, and then the meta boxes to be registered, and the meta boxes to be displayed on the front end. That's really all it's doing. Really pretty straightforward, pretty basic. But you can see here in the structure, this is just standard stuff. And then in the includes, those are those files I was just referring to. In terms of assets, I actually think I might have, oh yes, I do have some assets here that I'm using. And then let's jump first into the register CPT. This is what it takes to register a post type in WordPress without a plugin like the CPT UI. How I typically do it, honestly, is there's a great tool, online tool called Generate WP. I really like it a lot because I don't want to think about every single line of these things. And sometimes I don't want to define all these lines. But in this case, for the example purpose, I basically defined every single line that you could define. You don't have to define all of these. A lot of them will be inherited if you do them correctly. But the first thing that this is doing is just registering compositions as a post type. And this whole array right here is the labels. And these are the arguments for the post type. So when we were looking at the CPT UI and you saw how I defined the slug and then I said what the plurals were, all that UI is really doing is defining all of these arguments right here for you. That's really all it's doing. CPT UI is exactly that. It's a UI for this code right here. These are the arguments for what you can do with the post type. So right here, supports is one of the really important things you can do when you register post types. In this case, I want it to, what features of a standard post you want your post type to support. So for example, you might not care about excerpts at all. You don't need excerpts for your post type, like my RSVPs. I don't need excerpts. They're not going to be displayed on the front in any way that is searchable or navigable. So when I registered that RSVP post type, I didn't include excerpt in the supports. So what that does for me is on the back end, you're not going to see it. It's not there. I don't need to add meta boxes to my post type that I'm not going to use. It just is clutter. It just will distract me from what I'm trying to get done. So don't support it, basically. In this case of the compositions, I'm supporting the title, the editor, which is the TinyMCE editor. I do want to support excerpts because I'm, in this case, with compositions, I want to display them in an archive. I want people to be able to search for them, or maybe display the excerpt at the top of the screen as kind of like an introduction to what this composition is. I do want the author because maybe I'm going to have different compositions written by different people. The thumbnail, I'm going to do, that's the featured image. Comments, because I want to have my compositions be engaging. I want to provoke conversation with them. And then revisions is always useful because, maybe I make a mistake and then I can back it up. You see here, I commented out taxonomies. In this case, taxonomies is everything like categories and tags. I don't need any of those in this case, so I just commented it out. I didn't want to use it. I can go line by line through this, but quite honestly, the best thing to do is to look up custom post types on the WordPress codex, and it explains each of these things line by line really, really well. Bless you. They always come in threes. And then you see it just has that. This is the WordPress core function called register post type, compositions, and those are the arguments that we just looked at. And then this is the action is just hooking that whole function into where I want it to happen, which in this case I'm doing it pretty early to make sure that it happens when I want it to happen. And that's this whole file. Once that whole file is there, my custom post type is there and available, and it's going to have immediately, it's going to have all those things in supports or right away. But you notice in my post type, I have composer name, I have the date, I have the actual PDF of the score that I want to upload. I have things like that, and those are not in supports right now. They're not things that I'm going to be able to add via the register custom post type function. So what I have next is adding the meta fields. This file right here is adding metadata to compositions. CPT native is what I'm calling the native meta boxes. So this whole file here is what I need in order to add those meta boxes to that post type. The function in WordPress is called add meta boxes, and then I just tell it add the meta box according to this function right here, which is compositions add to top meta box. And all I'm going to do is just return that add meta box right here, and this is the function that actually has the markup of those meta boxes that I'm going to register right now. So this is basically triggering that we're going to have some new meta boxes. And then this is the function that I'm calling, and it's going to populate this with this function down here. And this is the top meta box at the top meta box markup, which is this guy, which is 1, 2, 3 boxes. So right away, there's lots of security things you have to keep in mind whenever you're creating your own meta boxes. That's an important note right now, because you have to really set that up on your own when you use the native functions in WordPress. You want to make sure that you're only able to save data to your meta boxes if you have the right capabilities. You don't want people to basically be able to hit a URL on the front end of your website and actually create data on your website accidentally. So the security that you build into creating your meta boxes is in order to prevent a security breach, basically. And there's really standard ways to do that in WordPress. Most often people use what's called a nonce, which is basically just a kind of like a cookie of the session that you're in at the moment. And it's going to check that nonce and make sure that the person who's logged in has the capability to actually edit posts in one way or another, which can be an editor, maybe an administrator. There's lots of options there for whatever you want. And here I'm just going to save the data. I want to get the data, because the other thing I have to do after I create these meta boxes, what I want to make sure is happening is that when I hit save, when the page refreshes, the new data that I entered there has to actually appear there so that you know that it's saved. WordPress doesn't do that for you automatically. You have to create the save function. You have to also make sure that it can be saved, but if you don't actually populate the field with the saved value, it's not going to show up there. So even though it is saved, you don't see it. That's problematic. So in order to create these meta boxes and save the data and display the saved data, you need multiple functions in order to do that. I hope you can see where I'm leading towards. It's not that this is amazingly complex. It actually is relatively straightforward when you think about the steps that you actually have to do in order to just save data in a post type. But making sure that you do all of those steps correctly with the right level of security and all that kind of thing, that's what these libraries like CMV2 and Advanced Custom Fields basically do for you. That's the reason why a lot of people choose those libraries, is because they don't want to have to worry about all these things. But you can see at the end of the day that first plugin, or that first file that I showed that registers the post type, it's a whole 71 lines of code, including the header that I have here, which is a ridiculously long header for just a file. And this one is a bit longer because there's more going on, because it's also multiple meta boxes I'm adding. But at the end of the day, 148 lines of code to add all of those meta boxes, to save all those meta boxes, to make sure that they populate in the fields again at the end of the day. So it's not a whole lot of code. Right now we're talking about 210 lines of code altogether to accomplish that. So when people talk about, oh, I just use CPT UI, whatever, because I don't want to deal with all the code. Well, just remember at the end of the day, it's not that much code. It doesn't really take all that much to make it happen. And that should be encouraging, because if you've never done native meta boxes before, you should, because you can. It's only 200 lines of code. You can do it. I would encourage you to try it. Yeah, there's a couple of them, good ones too. And I think Generate WP also has custom meta boxes, but I think it's like a paid feature. Anybody else familiar with Generate WP? Yeah, it's a fun little tool, and I'm glad that he actually is monetizing it now, because I want to make sure it doesn't go away. But I think generating meta boxes is a premium feature. One cool thing about CPT UI and Advanced Custom Fields is they both have an import-export feature free built into them. So for example, with CPT UI, you can build out your post type, like my RSVP post type, or this one, the compositions post type, without the meta boxes. And then you can just hit export and say, I want to use the same RSVP post type on 10 different websites, because I got 10 clients who all want RSVPs now, because I told them I'm an RSVP expert, because that's what freelancers do, right? As soon as you learn something new, that's going on your resume, that's going on your sales page. Well, now I just can export that post type over and over again and import it back in with that plugin, and you're gold. You do the same thing with Advanced Custom Fields. You can export those custom fields and import them into the next site too. And now every single time you have a reproducible, easily created package of RSVPs or compositions. So with these two files, I registered my post type, and here I added my meta boxes. I have functions here for how to save them and how to make sure they get populated with the saved data. A lot of this is easily Googleable to find all this stuff. I'm definitely not a wizard when it comes to any of these things. I didn't do anything amazing to make it 200 lines of code. Like, I think Yaron and Devin and anybody, Evan, Scott, you guys can all probably do this faster than I can, with probably less code than I did. It's not it's not overly complicated, and it's easy to find that information. Then the last file I have here is basically how I'm going to output those fields on the front end. I don't want to go far into this one, but that's the one thing that we haven't talked about at all yet, but is basically showing those fields on the front end. In this case, I'm actually adding all of the custom information of the compositions. I'm actually going to tack it on to the end of the content. So it's going to be basically like the title is the standard title like you would see on a post. And then I have a description of the composition. And then I'm actually going to add all of the additional kind of meta information about the composition to the bottom of the post automatically. So all I did in this case is just filter the content so that I can put it before or after the content, basically. So I have some stuff here that's going to go before my content and some stuff that's going to go after. I got, a little bit fancy here by just saying before the content equals this function. This function is down here, and it's just calling a template part, which is over here. These are all choices I made in my plugin in order to create this post type and how I want to display it. There's a million different ways you can do this. And these are just some choices that I made. These are all the types of things you have to think about when you are coding these things natively, basically. And for me, it was just easier to do it that way, because if I want to make a change now to the front end, I'm going to go to template parts, and anything that's in the after content, I know I can just change that right here really quickly, because this feels like a theme template to me now, and I don't have to worry about all that other code right now. I know it's in the right place. Eventually, I could even build into the plugin that if you drop a certain named file into your theme, that it'll override my template. I could do that too. That's easy way to make a nice distributable plugin. But generally, that's all it really is doing. That's all it takes. 200 lines of code. You have a custom post type, meta boxes, and you're good to go. Oh, I didn't mention. I have some custom JavaScript here as well, because there were some things with the, for example, I wanted these to be next to each other. For example, if you register these meta boxes just by default, you have to handle the markup yourself. Once you handle the markup, you have to style the markup, how you want to style it. So I'm registering a style sheet just to this edit screen, so that it floats these fields next to each other. I wanted to do some fancy stuff with the upload button to make sure that I can clear it out and whatnot. So I have some custom JavaScript in there. None of that, I don't get any of that out of the box. I have to code that all myself. So let's make sure we take that into account too. So let's just do the admin. On the admin, it looks like I have around 60 lines of code. So we're at 260 lines of code so far. That's with the JavaScript. The admin CSS is a whole 26 lines of code. So we're talking about 286 lines of code right now. That includes JavaScript, CSS, PHP, HTML, all the above. The kitchen sink. No React though. Go home React. And we're good. So that's the native meta boxes. Does anybody have any questions right now about the native meta? If you're watching on YouTube right now, I don't see any comments whatsoever. I'm blind to your comments. I think I'll have to comment in later. So, but comment and I'll reply later. Anybody else have questions about any of that right now off the top of your head? Exactly. You can do that for sure. And a lot of themes do register their own post types. And then the people who use those themes are so sad when they switch themes and lose all their content. So that. How many themes have you gone through for your work site? Okay, you're gonna change the theme. So. Like my own personal site, like I feel like I'm not the kind of guy who's like, oh, I'm just gonna buy a new jacket or whatever, but I've changed my theme 4 times in 5 years. So, I kind of like the one I have right now, so I'm hoping it lasts at least 1.5 years. Yeah, so that's just my strong advice. It's better in a plugin. No. You could definitely put them all in here. So what if I was going to add additional post types? Most likely what I would do, and these other guys can probably clarify as well, I would most likely make a file for each post type just because it's cleaner and easier that way. I mean, I do have to do the include for it separately and whatnot. I might, if I knew I was going to have 3 or 4 post types, what I might do then is in the root, I would have an include that goes to like a kind of like a bootstrap file that says include all post types, and then that one would load all the other ones. I've heard some people say that they don't like those kinds of bootstrap files just because of the, you're including an include, but to me it makes a lot of sense just logically, so I would know how to find things quickly, and I haven't seen it take down anybody's site yet. So, Yaron, do you have comments about that? Warnings? Cool. Yeah, all right, so that's native post types and meta boxes. Let's switch over to the compositions one. I'm gonna go over here and just switch it out live. So we're gonna deactivate this one, and I'm gonna activate that one. And lo and behold, it looks exactly the same. I go to all compositions, the exact same one is there. I hit edit, and it looks a little bit different, but the basic information is there. Where'd my upload PDF go? Let's see, maybe I put it down at the bottom. Oh, audio PDF, there it is, bam. Yeah, looks good. Did I actually do a front end for this? Let's see. Yeah, look at that. I even embedded the audio right there. Fancy schmancy. Download it, download the PDF. Isn't this great? Don't you want to buy this plugin today? I'm just kidding. All right, so let's look at what I did over here. Close it out, close it out, close it out, plugin. Here we are back to the plugin file. This one is composition CPT with CMB2. Fancy, fancy. Again, dive, you hit it automatically. Here's some a global. I didn't define the URL, interesting. And now I'm loading the text domain, and now here's my includes. First thing I'm going to do include is I have to include CMB2. So if I'm going to extend this library, that's what libraries are for. They're for extending. If I'm going to extend this library, it has to actually be loaded up and available. CMB2 has basically a bootstrap file where it's like if you load that one file, it loads everything else that it needs in order for you to play with it. So right, all I'm doing here is registering the CMB2 init file. That they call it init instead of bootstrap. And then I have my file for registering the post type. Notice I still have to register the post type. I'm still doing that. There's no difference there. And then I'm adding the meta fields. I still am going to load a file in order to do that. And I'm going to do the metadata to the post the front end part. So so far, basically, this first the basic boilerplate plugin file is virtually identical to the other one. We're going to look at what I include though. Add registered post type. It's the exact same, no differences. You can see it's again, 70-ish lines of code. Add meta fields. This is where it gets different. Instead of hooking into register or add meta boxes, I'm not going to be adding meta boxes with the native WordPress function anymore. I'm instead going to use add action CMB2 admin init. And that's going to call basically the same function that I had before, but it's going to be done in a totally different way. The thing with CMB2 that's really important to remember is that a lot of people use CMB2. And so if you are running CMB2 just plain vanilla and somebody else is on your website also, they will butt heads. The way that CMB2 accommodates for that is they allow you to define your own prefix so that your instances of CMB2 are different than the other guys, unless they magically pick compositions as their prefix, which, is possible. Should probably do like SCRT, something like that. Probably what I should do. And then this is where I'm actually going to create the new meta box. And instead of having to remember all of those various labels and whatnot, all I need to do here is create an ID, a title, the object itself, and then I add where I want it to appear on the screen itself. And remember, I told you that you could change the priority of where the meta box appears on the post edit screen. In this case, advanced means right below the title and above the content. So that's my box. My box is now registered in just 5 lines of code. That's pretty excellent. And then I'm going to add a field to that box. Instead of having to create my whole entire markup, you'll notice that over here I don't have a markup field, a meta field markup file that I have to include, like I did in the other plugin. I don't have that. All I have is just I want a meta box, a meta field in this meta box that's called composer name, and I want that to be a text type right there. And it's going to have a description below it. And I want to make sure it doesn't conflict with anything else, so it has my prefix and it's called composer name. So I just registered a text field, so it's registered automatically, and the markup for it is also automatically generated. That's what CMB2 is doing for me here in this case. I don't have to load up a whole nother file to create the markup, to make sure that the field is saved correctly, to make sure that the value of the field when it's saved is populated in my field correctly. I don't have to do any of that. CMB2 does all of that for me. And it does it in just 5 lines of code. I'm going to add another field. This one's the date. And they have a field type called text, date. And I can even define what the format is. Now I'm going to do another meta box, and it's the same idea. Here's the box. Here's the field. Here's another field. Now I'm all done. I can even change the label of the button, add PDF. They have all of those arguments built into the library automatically. So here again, on this one, we're talking about 86 lines of code. But remember that in the other plugin, it was 2 different files, and altogether it was, how much was it? It was 160 lines of code for the 2 different files. So I did half as much code for the same end result, unless you count the library itself. If you care about how large your plugin is, then you have to include a whole library. Here's the library right here, CMB2, and here's everything that's there. I think the total size of it is still like, I don't know, 500 kilobytes at the most. It's very small, generally speaking. Yeah, what's your name, by the way? Johnny. What's your question? Generally speaking, most people who distribute with CMB2, the library, not the plugin, they usually include it from GitHub directly, maybe through Composer. A lot of people use it with Composer, and then locally, all you would do is just do the commands for Composer update CMB2, or just pull down again from GitHub. Just do a pull from their latest master. They do update, fairly regularly. What's nice about CMB2 is that it used to be owned completely by an agency called Web Dev Studios, and they actually just recently, within the last like 5-6 months, reached out to Human Made and another agency named Zao. And so the 3 of them together, because all 3 of them were using CMB2 a ton for their clients, they're all collaborating together. So if we go to the website, I brought it up here. This is the GitHub repo. All of CMB2 used to be GitHub/WebDevStudios/CMB2, but now CMB2 has its own organization basically, because it's managed by 3 different agencies now. You could, and of course, like anything else, you would want to double check to see whether or not the updates that they pushed are beneficial for you or not, or whether you care or not. As soon as you have the code, it's open source. You can do what you want with it. Free as in speech, So you don't have to update it. As long as it continues to work in your plugin, you don't have to update it. If they said, oh, hey, here's a big major update because our code had a security vulnerability, then you would care, for sure. But keep in mind, this on the repo here, this isn't a plugin. If you download this and try to install it on your site, it will not function. This is a library. The plugin for CMB2 is on WordPress.org. So what the plugin does is the plugin has the library baked into it, and then it has a whole UI, WordPress UI for creating meta boxes. So, yeah. So altogether, what CMB2 did for me in this case is it basically allowed me to create my meta boxes with half as much code, and I don't have to worry about the security part of it. I don't have to worry about the markup. I don't have to worry about whether it saves correctly or not. All I have to make sure is that it's there. Now I have a couple includes here. No, actually, I don't even have any CSS or JavaScript attached here either. I didn't need it because CMB2 does all of that. CMB2 has all that. They have CSS, tons of CSS here. They have tons of JavaScript doing everything it needs to do. This is a really tiny example, a really tiny plugin. It's just one post type that's really basic. So if you're building on a client site like we talked about earlier that has like 5 post types that all have different needs and they each have 10 meta boxes, you could see that using this might save you a lot of time at the end of the day. So that's the idea. That's the overall idea. And it works really well. It's great. I want to just highlight a couple other options that I didn't get to play with yet. There's another library out there called Carbon Fields that I keep meaning to play with because I like the sound of it, the look of it. They have a different UI. They definitely emphasize the layout of the meta fields a lot more strongly than CMB2 does. You can see how this one has a very strong grid layout. And what I like also about it is they have really strong documentation. it functions very similarly to CMB2. So, but they're very much object oriented in the way that they build this all out. So you're going to use some classes that they have namespaced. That's how they're preventing conflicts. Basically, is they're namespacing it. It's relatively straightforward. It's just a different way of basically registering those meta boxes and meta fields. But the documentation is all there really clearly. And here's all the different field types. Devin and I both have had a lot of experience with CMB2, and the thing that we ended up moving away from it for was because one thing we needed a lot in our plugin was a repeater field. And CMB2's repeater field is functional, but not elegant, and breaks really easily.
You load all their stuff on init, not plugins loaded. So you can't use, which is fine for like registering meta boxes and things like that, but not fine when you need to use their functions. If you want to use their CMB2 get option function, it never works.
I think they changed that recently. I think they created their own action called CMB init now.
You know, I mean, like when they call it out.
Oh, okay.
So they have a pretty clever way of loading their own data because they know that they're being loaded by so many plugins. Load the same thing twice. So they have a mechanism that will every new release will decrease the priority of when it gets loaded, so it gets loaded earlier and then checks to make sure I can actually show when I present the line thing. But when as part of that logic, when they actually go and say, okay, hey, include our files, register owners, et cetera, they don't do it until the init, way after the plugin's loaded. So when your plugin's loaded on plugins loaded, a lot of those functions aren't available. So it's okay when you're registering meta boxes because register meta boxes come way later as well. But if you want to actually say, hey, CMB2 get option, it's not there. So you have to write your own. Maybe give you code like here, put this in your plugin to get options.
Nice, that's good feedback. The other one that I wanted to highlight is a new one that I just found out about the other day called TypeRocket. I want to play with it. I want to see how it works. We have developed our own MetaBox class, basically, for Give, and that's one thing that Kevin is going to present on in a little bit. He's actually on hold. I need to send him the link. So I'll just mention this one. TypeRocket is also, I think, worth looking at. It seems like it's relatively new, but again, it's really well documented, and I'd like to see how it works. It looks, right here, require TypeRocket in it. That looks really basically identical to CMB2. So there might be some real strong similarities there. Just another option, generally speaking. Here's the ACF website, if you want to try that out at some point. ACF Pro is really, really, really full-featured, has tons of stuff for building out complicated websites. It's excellent. We use it on our Give website for pretty much everything. It's a great tool, great UI overall. You can also export everything, and it's great for migrating between live and local if you need to, if something doesn't go well with a migration. It's good stuff overall. But you can't distribute it. Yep, that's right. If you want to look at my repos that I just highlighted, my username on GitHub is Mathetos, and Compositions is the one with native meta boxes. Nope, with the CMB2 one. And there you go. Compositions native is the one with the native meta boxes. Yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah, so you drop it into the pro version. Yeah, the profile.
Yeah, the pro version, it has basically pro types of fields that people are paying for. It'd be like distributing a Give add-on. that you're supposed to pay for. It's essentially the idea. And I think, I need to double check, but I think they have certain licensing on their Pro version that's not necessarily totally GPL. I'm not totally sure on that.
Because I've actually used the light dropping the files in a plugin that's on the
Yeah, the light version is basically like in terms of licensing. No. Yeah. Yep.
I don't think they can legally stop you from putting it in your plugin based on the nature of GPL, but WordPress will stop you from putting that plugin.
Yeah.
Well, I still do it for my client plugins.
Yeah.
All the work I do for clients, I do as a plugin. I do that a lot.
That's what it's, I mean, intended for.
Yeah. But, no, I mean, like, I don't always necessarily install it. Sometimes.
Yeah.
But anytime I'm making a plugin that's going to be out there, I'll have to use CMP.
One caveat that I wanted to share about all of the MetaBox things is you might have heard conversation recently about Gutenberg, and there's a great post on WP Tavern right now that is about Gutenberg and its plans for supporting custom MetaBoxes. And basically, the plan right now is that there is no plan. They don't have any solution right now for how they're going to support custom MetaBoxes. And that is freaking a lot of people out, understandably. I think it'd be worth your while to be paying attention to what's happening with Gutenberg right now for the sake of, I need to ping Kevin real quick. Everybody's looking at my Facebook. Go ahead, Kevin, talk one more time.
Check 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Testing.
All right.
That works.
Yep, it works. Let's just do that. All right, man. Yep, share screen, yep.
Okay. Just a quick little introduction. I'm a developer. I work alongside Matt Devin in the posted WordPress. I work on plugins like Give and WP Business Review. And tonight, what I want to share with you guys is a custom settings API that was kind of adapted from Give to work for our new plugin. And I thought it probably makes sense to give you all a little introduction to the plugin itself so that you know what we're building towards. Let me go ahead and share this real quick. Now, let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep, we see it.
Okay, so if you guys aren't familiar, WP Business Reviews is a new plugin we're working on that aims to bring your best reviews from across the web onto your WordPress site. That means if you have reviews on Google, Facebook, Yellow Pages, you can bring all those reviews together into WordPress and just display them alongside the rest of your website content. So this is just kind of an example of something we're shooting towards. This would be a gallery of reviews, and so the plugin itself would handle fetching the reviews from the platform and also give you the ability to present them in a number of ways to work with your team. Now, we're in beta right now, so if you guys are interested by the end of this, you're definitely welcome to sign up and help us test when it's released. Like I mentioned, the 4 platforms we're supporting out of the box are Google, Yelp, Facebook, and Yellow Pages. And these are actually existing plugins that we have right now that are available, but they're all individual. So one of the ideas with this new plugin is to bring them all under one group and to kind of standardize the process of fetching their reviews, displaying them. We realize that functionality across all of these platforms is really similar, and it makes a lot of sense that if we're going to iterate on the product and make it better, that we benefit all of these platforms at once and not, picking and choosing in our development time. But I think that's going to result in faster iteration and development and more features for our users. These are some of the other platforms we're looking at down the line. Basically, any site that has a REST API, we're able to fetch reviews from, standardize them, and bring them into WordPress. So enough of that. I don't want to make this a sales pitch, but I do want you guys to have an understanding of what we're building. Actually, what I want to talk about today is this custom settings API that we built to power the plugin and the user's definition of the settings that allow you to connect to each of these platforms. So this, I'm going to kind of walk you guys through the process as I did just over the last couple of months. I'm still kind of old school in the sense that I like to start with Photoshop mockups. So I'm going to walk you through the mockups that kind of lay out the design of the settings screen, and then kind of tell you how we adapt that into a settings API, and essentially how it works, live in the plugin.
Sounds great.
So this is, yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Just said sounds great.
Cool. So this is our main landing page for our settings. Basically, I was listening in on Matt's introduction. I think he did a great job introducing the idea of custom post types and how to register them. What we basically did was register a custom post type called review, and we added a couple of options pages under that post type. Added a custom icon, and so we've got kind of our plugin branded with its settings pages. They're all under one menu item. Everything's kind of all in one place. So when you first get here, the first step that we want our users to do is to choose their active platforms. So by default, we're having Google, Facebook, and Yelp active, and we're going to leave Yellow Pages inactive unless someone really wants to show those reviews. The idea is that any of the checked platforms will appear, in the sidebar of the settings so that you can go in and manipulate them. But if you're not using a platform, it doesn't make sense to crowd the interface. And the check marks and the red exclamation, that's to indicate whether you're connected to the platform or not. So if we move forward, start to kind of understand the breakdown of the settings API, we have three main content types: tabs, which are the highest level content type; sections, which appear down the side. So tabs contain sections, and sections contain fields. So you're able to navigate across the horizontal tabs, and if they contain multiple sections, you'll see a sub-menu. And what that allows us to do is create a multi-level settings framework, but one that's still easy to bounce around to. This is all on one page, so we're not refreshing the page while navigating across tabs. It's a really slick experience when you're actually moving from one section to the next. This is an example of one of our platforms. So in order to get Google reviews, you have to enter Google Places API key. One of the things we're trying to do with this settings screen is provide as much inline documentation as we can. So the settings API we're using, when you register the field, you can also register a description. Description can contain links. So we want, at any stage in the process, the user to know what's next in the process. I don't know what a Places API key is. This link will take you there, explain it, tell you how to get it. And each platform is different, right? So Facebook, we're connecting through OAuth, so it doesn't need an API key. It's just simply a button click that will load your Facebook pages. Any page that you're an admin of would then be available to the plugin, and you'd be able to display your reviews from any of those pages. And then this was just the screen. Whenever I'm doing mockups, I try to show different states of screens as much as possible. So this is like an error screen. What will happen is the Yelp wasn't connected yet, showing an error state for each field, drawing attention to the fact that, hey, we need to do something. We need to provide the client ID, the client secret key, in order to connect to the Yelp and fetch reviews. So that was the general tab. The advanced tab, this is a little bit simpler of an example, in that these are settings most users may not need to go to. Most users won't need to disable the plugin style. But we do always give the option to remove plugin settings and data on uninstall, but we don't do that by default, and that's something we kind of do across all of our plugins, which is maybe a debated topic, but anytime that it would be really difficult to recreate the state of your plugin, you want to be really cautious about deleting everything on uninstall unless your user opts to that option. That's kind of the purpose of that tab. And then finally, we have a Pro Features tab that's only in the free version of a plugin to let the user know, hey, you enjoy the free version, here are some other features that will, by the time we launch, we'll have some nice images in there to, advertise what's available if you upgrade, be able to filter reviews, add custom reviews, display mashups, like that. This is our main settings screen. There's one additional component that I wanted to spotlight, and that's our reviews builder. So this isn't going to be powered by the settings API, but it will use the same field template that power, the input text fields, the radio buttons, the checkboxes. We want to reuse as much as possible. And what the review builder does is it lets you kind of configure how your reviews display. So whether you want them to appear in a list, the gallery, whether they want to be Facebook or Google reviews, that's what the review builder allows you to do. We're not going to touch on that too much today. I just want to let you know that is the kind of second piece of the plugin, which is how you pull in the reviews. And finally, if you upgrade to the Pro version, then you get custom review functionality. So if you get like handwritten reviews and a guest book, or someone emails you a review and says, hey, add it to your site, you can actually add reviews individually by yourself through the admin experience. So let's recap before we kind of get into how this thing is built. We've got this multi-level structure, right? Add sections and fields. And we have a few goals in place. I'm going to switch over to kind of how it's built, but before that, I'll pause and see if there's any questions so far.
Anybody have any questions? Questions so far?
It looks pretty terrible, right? I don't know what Kevin's thinking. I can't see your face, but I'm sure you're smiling. Anyway, everybody loves it so far. Oh, wait. There's one question. Will the settings interface be a slick open source component? Like, will we open source it? I mean, the plugin will be free, so it'll all be there.
I definitely would like to kind of generalize it, and we could, talk about it open sourcing it, so it's more ready to go out of the box. We don't have to do a lot of things that are specific to our plugin. But I would love to make this something that people can learn from. Cool. Let's jump into the framework that powers this thing. I can get out of that preview. All right. So what are the goals that we laid out and that led us down this path? And why not use one of the existing frameworks, one of the out-of-the-box frameworks? Why did we go this custom route? So some of the things we wanted to achieve was a multi-level settings framework. And it's not that those things don't exist. Certainly they're all over the place in WordPress, but often, it's the WordPress gray user interface. Bouncing from one tab to the next is a page refresh on every tab change. So we want to create something that's a really slick experience. First and foremost, I want to ensure that it's accessible. I think I'm going to jump over to the live demo now to show you a bit of how the interface actually works. So when we're here on the screen, again, you can change tabs without a page refresh, but we are updating the hash. If you guys can see that up there. What that allows you to do is if we ever needed to link to a specific panel, from elsewhere in the plugin, each one of these sections in the settings API has a distinct URL that we can predict. And whenever I refresh the page, say with this Google hash, we can ensure that the Google tab is initialized. We don't always land on the default tab. So that may seem like a little user experience touch, but it's a really difficult thing, at least from my perspective, to handle because you're using JavaScript to change that hash. And you have to make sure you're reinitializing the tabs on each hash change. So again, it feels really quick to jump around to these different review tabs, and again, this is a work in progress. It's not as polished as the mockups I just showed you. But I ended up adding more fields, for example, and it'll allow you to do no follow links or open links in new tabs, and the Pro Features tab. The one thing we're going to do here that's kind of cool is to pull this content in from our website, so that we're not, that's for a few reasons. We're not bogging down the plugin by including images or code that's not necessary to its function. That's one thing. And two, it allows us to update that page on the fly. So let's say we introduce a new Pro feature that doesn't affect the free version, and we don't have to push a new plugin update to the WordPress plugin directory to communicate that. We can just pull that new data in from our website. So I think I left off talking about accessibility. One of the things that I always start with is the idea of, like, what would this interface look like without CSS? And I use that image or that architecture that's in my head based off of that question to structure how the DOM is laid out. And what usually happens in that case is that the tab structure you end up with really naturally falls into place. So here I'm just navigating via keyboard by tabbing through the panel and pressing enter to select into one of them, and then the tab order just naturally goes into the content of the setting. Obviously, we need a better focus style on that button so you can read it. But this is one thing that's kind of going on with Gutenberg. I don't know if you guys tried some of the earlier versions, but they had these really kind of garish focus styles, which are necessary for accessibility. But when you just go in and click them, you don't necessarily want to see a big blue tab or a big blue outline around that tab. So what I did with our settings API is it detects whether you are actually clicking mouse down versus selecting the tab. So if I click with the mouse, we don't get the outline. But for accessibility, as soon as I click tab or press any key that shifts focus, then that outline comes back. I can go right back to making sure that it's both keyboard accessible, but also aesthetically pleasing to folks who are just using the mouse. Little thing, but I think it helps add to the overall just seamlessness of the interface. Okay, back to more important or more complex items. Responsive settings page. So this is something that, say what, responsive settings pages in WordPress, I know it's kind of a unique concept, right? WordPress core settings pages are really not a great experience when they're responsive. But one of the things I really wanted to make sure was that, we're not just using the example set by WordPress core as the example that we follow when we create a responsive settings page, but we're really creating the best experience possible. So what I decided to do was, instead of trying to maintain that complex tab structure on a mobile phone, I decided to just unveil all the panels in a vertical stream. We know that a flick of the thumb is the easiest navigation on mobile. So by doing this, they can just see all of their platform settings in one screen, and then when there is screen space available, you'll see the tabs pop in on the side. Now we can go back to navigating in that way.
Nice.
So that is accessibility, responsiveness, and a really big item was the ability to decouple data from the presentation layer. And I thought it would be good to walk you guys through kind of building up the framework, because it's kind of overwhelming to look at it all at once. But when you build it up from the ground level, much easier to wrap your head around. So the settings framework for our purposes tonight, just think of it as a large multi-level, multi-dimensional array that holds all of our setting information. It doesn't worry about the HTML markup. All it does is it holds our settings in a specific order with a specific structure that we can rely on, right? It's structured data. So at the very basis of the framework array, with just a single general tab, right? We have the ID. The ID is used in the hash of the URL. That's how we know what tab to initiate when the page loads. The name of the tab, which is wrapped in the getText function, so that's available for translation. And then the sections array is our next level, which we'll look at in a second. But this is really the foundation of our whole settings API. So if that was to be loaded, basically you see one gray general tab, with no content. What we do next then is add in a section. So we just looked at a tab and zoom out a bit. That's still big enough for you guys to see.
Yep.
Cool. So what I did here is I added in the platform section, which is the first section in the general tab. And that has its own structure as well. It has an ID. So again, it can update the hash of the URL. It has a name that appears in the sub-tab. It has a heading. It has a description. And what we're using this description for is for that inline documentation I was talking about. So just to show what that looks like is the platform name appears here, the heading, the description, and then the fields are contained within the section. So kind of keep building up this array. So what does it look like when we add fields into that array? Keep zooming out a bit more. Sorry to get small, but this is what I meant when I said, like, if I was to just show you guys this right off the bat, it's pretty overwhelming, right? But when you understand the structure and like the three-tiered structure that it's built with, it starts to make a lot more sense. So here I've added in the active platform field, and that's the 4 check boxes that determine what platforms are active in the plugin. So again, we have certain fields that are always there, ID, name, description, but with the field type, with field array items, we pass in this type key, and that's what tells us, one, how to display the field, and this tells us the checkbox field type. It allows us to give a default value. So by default, we want to activate Google, Facebook, and Yelp. And then we pass in all of the options. So, Yellow Pages there is the 4th option. So just to show you how that maps, again, if we go over, we see that Google, Facebook, and Yelp are defaulted. And then I can activate Yellow Pages, save that, and I get send in notifications within the tab that I saved. So if I was to change to Google and have my API key and save here, again, that's a page refresh that just happened. But because the hash has that tab ID in it, we know what tab to initiate. It's a very seamless experience. It feels like we haven't even left. And one more step to building this array. Now, again, this is just the one tab, one field. I'm sorry, one tab, one section, and one field. But you can imagine, the entire settings page is a very large, multi-dimensional array that holds all of that information. But one last thing that we do is we filter each of those arrays. So at each level in the settings framework, we apply a filter. And what that allows us to do is, let's say that we wanted to add an additional tab to the settings page. Maybe you're a third-party developer, you want to extend our plugin. You don't want to modify our core code and just add to that array. But what you can do is filter it, add in your own array for the tab, and then basically you've got your settings right alongside ours in a consistent fashion. You don't have to worry about how they display. All you're doing is basically passing in structured data, and we take care of the rest. Just to give you kind of the big picture of what that whole framework looks like. That's it right there. It keeps scrolling. So you get the idea, all the fields, the active platform fields, the Google section, Facebook section, each of these follow that structure that we just walked through. And just for example's sake, I have this test tab in there, and I'm just going to comment. So I haven't changed anything. All I'm doing is adding to that array. And when I refresh the page now, I should see this 4th tab available. So you can imagine if we were to add new functionality that required new tabs and new settings, it's as simple as either directly modifying that array or hooking into it and filtering either the tab, the specific section, or the field array themselves. If we just wanted to add, say, a field at the bottom of the advanced setting, we can do that. So very flexible, hooks at each level of the process, and while it's a little bit more work up front, we'll save us a ton of time down the road, and it takes a lot of chance for human error out of the equation, right? Because I just showed you how to modify the settings without having to write any markup. Basically, each of the field types has one markup template that injects the field ID, the default value. It's all automated so that we don't have to match up HTML markup and field ID with the ID in the database. It's all coming from one source, and it's that settings framework.
Nice.
I'll pause there. Matt, any questions on that?
Yeah. Anybody have questions? Too many questions? Not enough questions? One thing I'll just clarify, like, the reason why we're doing it this way is because it's a distributed plugin. This isn't necessarily what you would want to go through for a client, unless this client was paying you 6 figures. But it's possible you might have a website, or you might have a client that is really needing to make a lot of changes. Maybe it's an e-commerce site and they need to make changes to their site often and regularly. Maybe you do want to give them some sort of custom settings panel in one way or another to allow them to turn stuff on and off seasonally or whatnot. That it is something you might want to consider. But in general, this is because we want to be able to extend this in the future. We're still laying a foundation down right now for us to be able to just step in and be like you saw, that test tab just was 20 lines of code. The only reason why it's 20 lines of code is because of the framework that it's all built on. And the framework that Kevin built out is really what most of the really time and effort went into. Of course, the framework has to be interpreted through those arrays that he was explaining right now. But that's basically how it's working and why we're building it out that way.
That we would have, like a wiki page for on our GitHub that would just tell you, hey, this is the structure. If you want to add any tab, any field, do this structure, insert your value.
Yeah, exactly.
But I thought it would be worthwhile to draw the distinction between what I just showed you, which we would refer to as the custom settings API, and the WordPress settings API. Did you cover that earlier, Matt? I may have missed.
We talked about, actually, we didn't talk about the settings API at all. We just talked about meta boxes and meta fields.
So there is a built-in API that WordPress provides a lot of things for you to do out of the box. It's certainly not as flexible, which is one of the reasons why we went our own way with it. But you could, for example, the settings API powers the WordPress default settings pages, like the general settings. And you can basically register settings, tack it onto the general settings page, and it does a lot of the work for you. So just to, in our custom settings API, when bounce back to it. So for example, when this Google API key is saved, right? There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we had to write ourselves. And I can show you that function. There's a function called save section. Yeah. And what that says is when a user saves the settings on the page, the fields of the active section are submitted. Validates the incoming nonce value, verifies the user permission, sanitizes the settings, and then finally updates the option in the database. So if any of those conditions isn't true, we return false to my function, the settings are never saved. So if someone decides they're going to try to insert some JavaScript into our API field, that doesn't belong there, obviously. So because we know that API key field is a password type, we pass it through a function that sanitizes it and just outputs the strict tag version of ensures it's safe to go on the database. If the nonce is not valid, we return early. Right now we have it set to verify the user permission, so verify the user as an admin. Otherwise, we're not letting, even non-admins shouldn't even see the page. But if they do make their way into there somehow, we're ensuring that they can't go ahead with settings. The access tab, so this is one thing I probably should have mentioned earlier. There are hidden fields in each of these forms. So each section is a form. And if I inspect the form, you can see that there is a tab and a section. These are the hidden fields. Is that big enough that?
Yeah, barely.
Okay. So these are hidden fields that appear, below this API key field. We're on the general tab in the Google section. That's what's used to the settings API. Then we know to check those values against the framework. Because there's nothing about the submitted data that tells them this is a text field. As far as the data that's submitted, this could be a number field, it could be any number of inputs. It's when we compare that section and that tab ID to the framework that we can then pull the type of field out and then sanitize it properly. So that's what we're doing here, is we're looping through each of the framework fields. And we're saying, hey, if the posted setting, if the field, the posted field value exists in the framework, then we're going to go ahead and sanitize it. Otherwise, we're just going to default to an empty value. Make sure that a safe empty string isn't the data.
Nice.
I got too deep.
No, it's good. I want to check again for questions or anything. Comments, hopes, dreams, aspirations. Oh, just on the plugin itself. We haven't actually built out the yet. Kevin, what's your thoughts on the markup at the moment for on the front end?
In what regard?
Yeah, are we going to do schema markup? I mean, it's a little bit of a complicated question. It's a little bit of a debatable issue. We had a lot of conversation about it a long time ago when we first built out these plugins. That basically schema markup is intended to show unique content, and this content is not technically unique. It's content that's actually from google.com or yelp.com or facebook.com, and it's being pulled into your website. So when you're presenting reviews with schema markup that's pulled in from an API, it might actually hurt you. Now, if it's smart enough to identify that review as a review that originated on its own site and it's on your site and we're presented with schema, that they would actually, hurt your SEO results. I don't think it's extremely likely, but at the end of the day, it's actually more technically accurate to not present it with schema markup. So. Sorry, he can't hear you. Yep.
Hear me now?
Yeah. Oh no. William was talking, but go ahead. No, you go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. Well, I was going to say that as far as the presentation templates go on the front end, we're going to offer two approaches to customizing the template. So this was an idea I got from Carl Alexander. He had a great post on how to handle shortcodes that output HTML in an object-oriented way. It feeds in basically a filtered path that then is included in the object buffer. So by default, it gets the R version, but you could filter that path to include reference to either a plugin folder if you're another plugin developer, or your theme folder if you're a theme dev who wants to customize our template. So two options there that will let you take full control over presentation, but still have access to all the data.
Nice. That makes sense. Was that clear? More or less? Basically, he's gonna be applying a filter to an output buffer instead of basically doing a if this file exists, then load that file instead type of logic, which a lot of plugins do to support templating in your theme. Instead, you're going to be filtering the actual output of the markup. So you could actually just do a add filter from a plugin if you wanted, or you could do an add filter from your functions file. It's a lot easier to customize it then, rather than checking for whether or not a file exists somewhere. And he's referring to an article that Carl Alexander wrote about this concept. So
that's what I have on the screen now. So this generator function he wrote method starts an object buffer, includes the template tag, and then returns the object buffer, so it outputs whatever was in that template tag. But the template is defined by its own method, which checks locations and defaults to the plugin template.
What's the name of the article, Kevin?
It is designing a class to generate HTML content in WordPress.
Nice. Kevin, thank you so much. Thanks for being on with us today and for walking us through that. I really appreciate it. I think it is something that I personally am excited about. And I think it's going to be awesome. Do you have any last wrap-up thoughts? Comments?
I don't think so. I definitely do look forward to generalizing the approach that we took with this. I think once we get through development on this, I'll have a better idea of how to make it more accessible to the general developers, so that it's kind of ready to customize out of the box, because there's a lot of things that are unique to our plugin in there right now.
Yep. Cool. All right. Thank
you so much.
Thank you. See you later. All right. Your own.